Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. With this video, I'll be reviewing Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage, designed by Wizards of the Coast and adapted by Roll20. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and gold patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, and Pretty Boy and Yuma. Thank you all so much for your support. Let us hop on over to the Roll20 page. So, Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage is the sequel to Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which just released a few months ago. And I was not very positive on Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I had a lot of problems with it, both the map art style and the way the story was structured and the limited scope. I had a lot of issues with it. So I was going into this one with very mixed expectations. And thus far, I've been very impressed with the 5th edition published adventures. And obviously, that's been a big focus of our D&D games, have all been based on all of these published adventures. So generally a big fan, except for the last one. So going into this one, what do I think? I like this one. I like this one a lot. I think this is a huge improvement over Dragon Heist. It's a lot different. It's way bigger than I was expecting. And it definitely puts the dungeon in Dungeons and Dragons more than anything I've ever seen. I mean, dungeon crawling is a thing in D&D, but and a lot of times it's just a part of a thing. And especially with a lot of these more story-driven things, you have Critical Role and dice camera action and these, there is combat involved, but it a lot of times takes a back seat to the storytelling and the characterization, which is fun. But sometimes you just want to go into a dungeon and kill shit and get cool loot and kill more shit. And I think Dungeon of the Mad Mage captures that really, really well. Let's go over real quick what you get with the $49.95 Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage Roll20 module. And again, I cannot stress enough how this is specifically reviewing the Roll20 module and adaptation. Now, because this is out on the same day, and it is a new module as opposed to me reviewing an old one, I will be reviewing and commenting on the adventure itself. That's a big part of the review, and partly what you all enjoy are my thoughts on the adventure itself. But in terms of how I think about the map structure and the design of the adventure and how they work for a digital tabletop like Roll20, this is specifically about the Roll20 module. So, what do you get? 26 5-foot battle maps. 26 maps. And these are not little, houses or whatever maps. I'll show you in a second. These are gigantic, the biggest maps. My heart's all aflutter. The biggest maps I have ever seen. And I've seen some big maps. I like big maps, and I cannot lie. That's a big reason why we ran Princes of the Apocalypse. The Temple of the Elemental Evil, just mega dungeon there with all these dungeons interconnected and themed, and all that's really fun. This blows that out of the water. This makes that look like a theme park, and this is the actual giant dungeon crawl. So 26, and they're all 5-foot battle maps. They're all scaled perfectly. They look great in Roll20. I cannot have enough praise for how it works. They have dynamic lighting all set up for Roll20 subscribers, and as well as options for the new advanced Fog of War. You get 57 unique named NPC character sheets. Only 25 of which, however, have the pictures and the player handouts. That's just, again, pulling in pictures from the book. A lot of times, when you've got the book, they'll name, different creatures will have names, and only some of them are going to have pictures. That's kind of normal. This one, it doesn't seem as bad as other adventures I've seen where you have a lot of... what Roll20 does is they have those tokens with the names on them instead of the picture. I hate that. It's always bugged me. It's something they've done forever. This one, there are a few parts where they do that, and it's a bummer, but in general, it's not as bad here because you get over 250 generic NPC monster sheets. So not like specific named creatures, but those are all of your monster manual. And it uses like everything from the monster manual, everything from Valos, everything from Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes, just every friggin' monster you could ever want because you have to fill out a 23 level mega dungeon that is Undermountain. Just you get all the things, and they're all set up. There's a alphabetized token page that has everything here. I'll go ahead and switch to that. As well as you can drag all the character sheets over and everything is set up. So there you go. And you can see, most of them have pictures. So there's a few of them where they have just the names. I love this gargantuan gelatinous cube. That's fantastic. But for the most part, most things have pictures, which is good. You can see a lot of really fun giant monsters here, which is greatness. Over 100 magic item player handouts, about half of which have the pictures and handouts available. I mentioned the alphabetized token page. You get player card handouts, as well as an interactive deck for Elder Runes and for Dungeon Secrets. So these are separate player handouts that you can show your players. These are secrets the players can learn, one for each level, as well as Elder Runes, which are things Halaster sets up that can either be beneficial or basically just be a huge trap. That usually are triggered whenever you teleport within the dungeon. So it adds a little bit of a randomize, like, oh shit, we can use this shortcut, but we might get a fireball in our face, kind of a thing, which is fun. And I'll show you how the deck works here in a second. You also get additional relevant supplemental rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide and Player's Handbook, as you can see right here. Rollable tables for optional random encounters, madness tables, and shapeshifters, all right here. Tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of rollable tables. Most of these are just the tokens, which you probably don't need to roll, but some of them are nice, like the madness tables and the wild magic surges and all that. You can just hit that roll button and it'll roll it for you. You also, with purchasing this module on Roll20, and I apologize if I'm sounding a little congested. I'm coming off a cold, so hopefully I'm not too nasally. You get a bonus token pack, map pack, and card deck that you can actually use in your other Roll20 modules. So you could actually take any of the maps in this dungeon, in this campaign, and slot any of those dungeon maps, which are huge, awesome dungeons, into an existing campaign that you have using that add-on feature, which is awesome. That's just included in the purchase. So even if you maybe don't want to specifically run this entire campaign and have to bring over your things from your existing Roll20 campaign instead, and this is very smart because a lot of these Roll20 campaigns are ongoing. You might have your own adventures, and you might just want to pull things from those adventures into your own. Or in this case, any one of these levels could actually make like a huge, you can see right here up here, could make a huge dungeon on its own. Just whatever you want to use. So you could use that with that map pack. So that's a really, really cool bonus feature. I also want to make a note that Roll20 subscribers specifically can access the first level of the dungeon for free. I believe you do have to make a new campaign for that, but it kind of acts as a preview. It's this level 1 dungeon level. You just search for Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage Adventure Preview. But that's also a cool bonus for Roll20 subscribers. So, Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Holy crap. 23 levels worth of content, and these are giant levels. So for those of you that know Roll20 and know about like the grid size, one square is a 5-foot square. So the first level alone is 73 by 98 5-foot squares. That's huge. That is absolutely gigantic. And I have scrolled out. I'm gonna scrolled out, zoomed out. I'm gonna zoom out basically all the way out, and I still can't quite encompass the entire. This is just level 1. This is the first level of this dungeon. I mean, this is as big as any dungeon I think I've seen in Roll20. The first level is 40 rooms, I believe. It's crazy. I was literally astonished. I was slack-jawed when I saw how much content is included here because of how little content was included in Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I was supremely disappointed by the limited scope and the fact that it's limited, and then it also asks you to take on 4 different paths, which are meant to be all mutually exclusive of each other. So at one point, the last third of that book, you only run 25% of the content in theory. A DM can do what they want with it and combine things, but in this one, this is all used, and it's a lot. There's a lot here. I really like the way it's organized. Because it's a dungeon crawl, it's obviously organized by instead of by chapters or by stories. By the way, very, very little actual story here. This is a traditional dungeon crawl. Now, it is a mega dungeon, and each dungeon does have stories within. I mean, just the sheer size. It's not like, you turn a corner, you fight this. You turn a corner, you fight this. You turn a corner, you're in a trap. You turn a corner, you get some loot. It's not like a randomly, to use video game terms, like a procedurally generated roguelike dungeon or something where it's just all random. Like, this is a very structured, meticulously crafted dungeon crawl with like factions and ongoing things. Like, the levels make sense. They're really ecosystems of monsters that would make sense to be endemic to that level, and why they would be fighting other monsters, and the storylines of each one. So there's not so much, like political machinations or things of that nature which you're dealing with in Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Instead, it is not quite self-contained stories, but kind of close to that, and a lot of just smaller side stories that you deal with, which I like, and I think that can work out really, really well. The only overall story is, and the weird part, the connection to the last one is non-existent, which that surprised me, because I thought by doing like Waterdeep something, this would literally be like the next step in that from Dragon Heist. You don't really have to worry about that. Especially if you're like me, where you're kind of like, on Dragon Heist, and on this one you're like, ooh, I wouldn't feel the need to have to run Dragon Heist at all, other than the fact that this adventure starts firmly at level 5, which, frankly, a lot of the officially published adventures start, at level like 3 or so. I think Storm King's Thunder, when we ran Storm King's Thunder, we literally like just catapulted up to level 5 as soon as possible when the real adventure started. And in this case, the real adventure just starts at level 5. So you could run you could run Lost Mine of Phandelver, because that takes you to basically like 4 or 5, and then start this one. And essentially the adventure just starts with, hey, you want to go to Undermountain? Go to the Yawning Portal, go to that giant opening, and let's see, there's the picture, and go nuts. It's really great artwork throughout. Obviously, Wizards always does a great job with this. And that's really there's no real plot. If you wanted to have the best connection, you would probably run the Xanathar villain from Dragon Heist, because you can go to Skullport in this one, so there are those connections, and there's the whole Xanathar guild is active down here. Other than that, I didn't see any real connection to the first one. And, in terms of like getting your players to care about Waterdeep, that's fine, but again, this doesn't even have much to do with Waterdeep. Like, other than the fact that it takes place under the city. Hang on one second. Hey, sorry about that. I had somebody come at the door that I had to deal with. I am back doing the review. So, as I mentioned, the story, the overarching story is basically non-existent. Like, at the beginning, you choose what is Halaster's goal. Halaster is the, if Serac is the Lord of the Tomb of Horror / Annihilation, then Halaster is the Lord of Undermountain, and he puts everything into place, rules over every single level, to the extent that he's got also, like, mini bosses, these apprentices that kind of rule over his various sections, and there's even some areas that completely oppose him. There's actually a Lich on like level 20, I believe, who is directly opposed to Halaster, which the players can then ally with them. And that's kind of the stories that end up actually taking place here. It's these nice little mini, these faction-based stories, these NPCs. It's not all just monsters that you have to fight. It's a lot of people that you can converse with. A great example of this is level 9 is a Wizards Academy that players can join. Or, like, you literally meet the Arkhanaloth headmaster when you first get there. And you can either choose to just bypass that entire level and go on to level 10, or you can choose to actually get involved in the, like, evil wizard politicking, and essentially the entire exam entrance is just dealing with your fellow wizards, and since it's like an evil wizard school, they're all just, opposed to each other and murdering. I think the actual note says, like, you can be a member until you get expelled or you're murdered, which is fantastic. I'm going to briefly go over what each of these levels are, because I think that's what you're all really wanting to see. But you can tell already I like this map style more than Waterdeep Dragon Heist maps. So Waterdeep Dragon Heist maps were very much like that parchment. It really looked like that hand-drawn style, which, that has a neat aesthetic. And I understand they got a lot of feedback, and a lot of people really liked that map, and I understand that. But it doesn't translate well, I don't think, to Roll20, to a digital tabletop, to where we're looking and playing on a monitor. And there are people out there who play something like Roll20 and still play like in person. They just use a monitor to do all that. I just don't think that style translates well. This style which is sort of an interesting like compromise or halfway point between what Dragon Heist did and what like say a Mike Schley map for Tomb of Annihilation is. It is more like you've got your nice thick black lines, and it just looks like a grid map. You've got these cool like dash marks to denote like where the edges are. I'm actually going to zoom in. I was zoomed out so far so you can actually see the dungeon, but here's what the individual looks, and you can see this is the dynamic lighting. You've got all the little, if there's an open doorway, you can open the door and shut the door with the little dynamic lighting layer in there. And it just makes it very clear and easy to see. Now, it doesn't always look this good. There are areas that specifically don't look as good with this art style. I do think that when you have like literal hallways and tunnels, this looks fine. If you wanted to, there's nothing stopping you from using this and then going into your art book and then typing, I don't know what, stone. We're going to get rid of my library, get rid of Prima assets. And I didn't want to do from the web crap. Let's go maps. Stone map. Give me a stone map. Again, not from my library. There we go. So you can use like any of the, you can just, pull a tile set, drag it over here, and then you've got, you could use whatever tile set you want. And you could technically, this works as a framework, and then if you wanted to, you could add in your own, floors, you could add in your own detail. I don't know if I would go to the extent of actually doing this. And the other thing is, I would be concerned, based on the size of these maps, I would literally be concerned about maps that were more like a Mike Schley style, detailed, colorful map, because I don't know if that would have the potential of bringing Roll20 to its knees when you have a map this big that would be that detailed. So I think the compromise actually works well here in its favor because of the sheer size and scale and scope of these maps. I'm willing to forgive having more of a bare bones simple map and having to use more of that. Okay, you enter a room and you have to sit there and wait for the DM to explain like what's in this room. Now there are certain sections of the map and room where I would definitely add some things on there, like if there's statues or things of that nature. I think you could easily find that in the Roll20 library and drag that on there, and that would be effective. But that's just kind of a useful note to have, is that I think this serves as a good framework, and then you can go in through with each map, although that is going to be quite the tedious process because there are a lot of maps here. So you've got level 1 and 2. I'm trying to think of what kind of the basic. I made some notes here about what each level has, and it gets pretty extensive. There's bandits pretending to be vampires here. They can find a revenant. The PCs can find a revenant which was betrayed on level 2, and then you can hunt down the other members of that party. Level 2 is actually one of my favorites in the entire dungeon because there's just so much going on. It's such a good example of the kind of storytelling and fun beats that can occur within. You can see here's which mainly it's mainly still tunnels this early on. This is a goblin bazaar up here, which is great. What is going on in level 2? Level 2 has a gargantuan gelatinous cube. Oh, let's go to that. Look at the size of this thing. This mighty lad, this absolute unit. Look at the sheer size of this gelatinous cube. This room's great. There's like another room here that's just full of seawater. You just open up and just fucking pours out water. And not every dungeon is like a death trap, like, fuck you room. Like, there are lots of cool stuff happening, but it's got a preserved, like, Dwerger skull inside of it, so it can use the enlarge ability, so it becomes, like, a twice as big gelatinous cube, which is just absolutely freaking amazing. Level 2 also features a flaming skull with lightning powers and copper plates all around, so it can fry all the copper plates. One of the adventuring parties I mentioned with the Revenant is here, fending off against Mesoloth and some Nothics. If you rescue him, he is like a straight-up, like, toxic player. Like, it's kind of a gag, almost, to where this guy is just a huge dickhole and a jerk and a bully, and he will technically join the party, but he will just be an absolute, like, awful, awful NPC, and I think that's meant to be that way as, like, an example of, like, don't play with this kind of person. And then there's a hallway of petrified creatures down here. All of these 25 labeled things are all different petrified creatures that the players can take and then put into this area here and between these pillars, and then de-petrify them, and various things will happen depending on which ones they do. That's fantastic. I love just level 2 has so much going on. That's, again, it's not just like you turn a corner and fight monsters. Like, there's so many unique storytelling things. They really went all out. One thing I do want to mention, and this is featured in every single level of the dungeon, is that there are these optional tunnels, and it is mentioned, they even call out the DM's Guild specifically, which is awesome. I think it's in this section here, dungeon features. And I like the way the journal is organized because, again, it's a dungeon, so you can easily organize the journal by level 1, level 2, level 3. Gates, no, it doesn't have it in here. I thought it would be in dungeon features. But any of these tunnels, um, okay, there we go. Each dungeon level has tunnels that lead off the edge of the map. These tunnels can be ignored if you have no desire to expand the dungeon. If you choose to expand a level by creating new rooms of your own, you can attach your section of the dungeon to an existing map by using one of these connecting tunnels. So literally, they just built into the map ways for you to add in your own dungeon, as if you didn't have enough content here already, which I think you have enough content for sure. But, there's cool stuff on the DM's Guild that'll be popping up. And if you have cool ideas, or maybe you want to attach this to an existing dungeon that you already have, or anything of that nature, you can use these tunnels. And literally, like, every corner of every map has these tunnels, and they're denoted by, leads to expanded dungeon. And the way it's set up, which is really clever, is the players have no idea it's there. So you can see here, it's not. It's just not even like it's not even like a dead end off the map. It's just not existent. Like they stop right here. So I like the way that's done. I wish it were actually done slightly better and that it was connected. And obviously you'd need like 2 doors. I guess you don't need 2 doors here. But you could just open that up, and then it would look kind of weird with the thing right there. I don't know. I'd probably do some kind of like copy paste job with the tiles and try to make that look clean. But it's not that hard. But the way it connects it is nice, because if you don't want to use it, they're not just a bunch of dead ends that go off the map, and you just have to say like, well, it doesn't go anywhere. Instead, they just don't even know that's there. But I think that's a really neat concept. I would probably not feel the need to add anything, because the sheer amount of content you get here is staggering. But it's there if you want it, which is really cool. And every single level features that. So level 2 was, like I said, one of my favorites. I don't know if I'm going to go through every single one of these. Some of these are way cooler than others. But I just want to show you kind of the design. It's kind of hard to see. Let's see. If I zoom like literally all the way out. That's... Oh! Oh! I'm going to break Roll20 here. Let's zoom slightly more. This might be... Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay. 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 We're in. We're in. We're good. We're good. I just love if you like dungeons and like me, you're just gonna stare at this lovingly. Like, I love maps, and dungeon maps especially. They're so fun, memories of just drawing on graph paper and grid paper, and I'm just giddy like looking at these maps, because they're so like, that satisfies that itch so much to have these awesome, well designed dungeons. You can see there's this underground river that goes through I think multiple levels of the dungeon. At one point even leads to the Underdark, but there's so much going on. Just for an example of like what a dungeon what a journal entry looks like. So each of these journals is its own level, obviously, and you've got a nice little bit of artwork. It's got kind of an overarching thing that says, okay, this level of dungeon is designed for this levels. That's something I should have gone over at the beginning, shouldn't I have? So as I mentioned, it's designed for level 5, and I believe they do reach level 20 by the end. However, I do know the final level of the dungeon, level 23, is designed for 17th level players, and it just says they'll reach 20 by the end. So that tells me, like, it's technically not like a 20th level dungeon, if that makes sense. Like, it's designed for 17, and then technically they should get even higher by the end of that dungeon. But yeah, I mean, your career is basically over by that point. I don't know if I guess you could still do. You're just gods at that point if you can beat Hallister. But it's each one. Let's see. It's under Undermountain Overview, I believe. There we go. So you can see here, each level of the dungeon is basically designed to level you up once, and a couple times it gets later on. It's like every other dungeon. So like the first one is 5th, 6th, 7th, and then it starts being like basically there's 2 for each level. So it's like, well, I guess Skullport's not really a dungeon, but you've got like 2 for 8th level, 2 for 9th level, 2 for 10th level. So every second dungeon you essentially level up the players, and it's like every third. No, I think it's still every second. And at the end, it's that 17th, and then probably 17th through 20th. So there's a lot here. There's a lot. What dwells here is a neat part, because that gives you a good overarching view of the major players of each level. So I'm trying to look. What's a good example for one? Okay, let's actually go to level 4. Level 4, the Twisted Caverns. I pretty much have to stay like max zoomed out so you can see like any part of this level. Okay, this one actually is a slightly smaller one, and by smaller I mean it's like 55 by 75 or something, which is like it's like 4,000 5-foot squares. Like, it's absolutely enormous. This one is like the size of what the Princes of the Apocalypse dungeons are, and those were giant dungeons. and this is one of the smaller ones. This is like the underground river continues, you can see, and then there's the lake. And even the water actually looks pretty good. Like, you can tell it's water. If I actually zoom in here, and I apologize for Roll20 freaking out. Again, if you're playing, you're not going to have to constantly zoom in and zoom out and change maps as fastly as I'm doing it. I'm kind of, stressing that system out as much as I can. And it's keeping it together. Hopefully you can see there's just a shit ton of Kuatoa here. But you can tell this looks like water. I feel like there's just enough detail to make it look good. I wouldn't like it if it was like the Dragon Heist style where it didn't have even that much detail to me. But this one does, and I think that helps a lot. The one time it doesn't specifically look good, and I'll show you that one later, is actually, I think, level 5, which is the forest. But like level 4, you've got the what dwells here. So it's like, well, there's the Aboleth, and then there's a drow contingent led by a priestess of Loth, of Avrindar, and then there's the Kuatoa. And these are like the multiple factions that are either opposed to each other, and the players can ally with one or the other, and it tells you like, okay, what's the situation here? Because again, all of these are almost their own self-contained dungeon stories. Level 3 had a really good story about there's a hobgoblin fortress, and you can meet the chieftain who's actually blind, but he has this dagger that gives him blind sight, and he's just this awesome war chief, but his dagger was recently stolen, so he needs to get that back so he can prevent this incursion of drow from attacking his fortress, and he's got this whole fortress set up, and that's an example of how you can work with this entire faction rather than just fighting like literally everything in every level. I mean, you could, there's nothing stopping you, but those stories can be created based on how your players want to approach all these different situations. The what dwells here also works for wandering monsters. So like there's one lower down that's just Umber Hulks are constantly tunneling in like every tunnel. So there's just under Hulks everywhere. What are we on? Level 4. Level 4 will also feature any kind of other things. So like, you can see there's side quests. Level 3 had the Arzok's Dagger I just mentioned, the Hobgoblin. And then finally you can break it down. And it's got this map here, which is for DMs, obviously annotated, which these are on the GM layer, these numbers, so your players don't obviously see these, you do. And it just breaks it down, boom, boom, boom. Every single piece of information you can have. And I cannot go over, there's too much content here. I can't go over all of this. I'm going to give you like a montage of some of my favorite things, but I just want to go over like an example of one level. The Aftermath section is really cool. This is essentially what tells you what happens after the players deal with this level, and it depends on which factions the players deal with. So, for example, in level 4, if they kill the Aboleth, then the surviving Kuatoa can reclaim their grotto, but it's short-lived because then the drow start attacking them soon afterward, and they continue until the Kuatoa are wiped out or forced to retreat upriver, and then the drow enslave the troglodytes, use these to farm areas 3 and 5, and they move the grotto's treasure. So it literally, like, these things happen depending on what the players decide to do. Or if the Aboleth survives, then it enslaves or kills off the remaining Kuatoa. Basically, those 4 fish people are fucked. The Aboleth enslaves the Etnan area too. Its slime poison kills the fungi, destroying the delicate ecosystem. The drow challenge the victorious Aboleth, but are unable to defeat it on their own. The dungeon and the writing knows that these things are happening, and the players are instruments of change, but it's not like everything is just sitting there waiting for the players to interact with. Now, that is kind of how it, video games and role-playing games work, because the players are the spotlight through which everything else happens. But once they leave, then the decisions they've made can affect those levels, because your players may be walking back and forth through these levels. Now, there are shortcuts and teleports throughout, which is absolutely necessary, because you cannot go, all the way to the bottom. And that's where the Elder Runes kind of come into play. There are numerous shortcuts that go to various levels, teleportations. Skullport, I believe, is located between level 4 and 5, or 3 and 5. I think it's between 3 and 4, which is a huge, cool... I'll go ahead and switch to that map, actually. Just a pit stop. Skullport, Skull Island here, which has all these tokens on there. And you can see, like, there's not, it's not detailed, but I can kind of tell, like, okay, this looks like a fortress. There's little ballistas set up, and you can kind of see, okay, there's a dock, and there's just enough detail where it's like, all right, that's a good compromise. The town is, actually, it's a separate map, isn't it? Yeah, there it is. The lower and middle, and then the upper is another map that's supposed to be kind of superimposed. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening on Skullport. There's There's a flaming skulls that kind of illuminate the area. There's a sea hag that literally sells zombies that players can lead by like nooses. The petrified remains of a giant worm have been turned into kind of a swanky restaurant. I believe that's on the upper level. Right here, there we go. I love that. So you can kind of see it. Petrified purple worm. That's greatness. The one example where I don't think the map looks nearly as good, I believe, is, yeah, level 5. Because this one is less tunnely and more just open. And you can see here it starts looking real kind of ugly. And not too great. This is supposed to be like giant underground forest area ruled by like a half-crazy druid. And this just doesn't look... When it's just nothing but big gray like this, that looks nasty. Like, I will admit that looks real nasty. But I will say this is like the only level where I really looked at it and go, ew, no, this doesn't look good. This map style has failed me all of a sudden. But this was I think the only one that I thought that. All the rest looked, even the underground swamp that's further down looked fine. This is the only one that really looked bizarre to me. There's a dragon here with a green dragon with a magic sword lodged in its skull, and it's a sentient sword, and it's making the dragon good, because that's the personality of the sword, and the dragon refers to itself as a sword and everything. That's freaking hilarious. It's just shit like that is so good. Let's see, just go over a montage of some of my favorite stuff. So other levels include 2 warring genies from the planes of water and earth. That's on the ooze level, I believe. This one is the underground forest. There's a crashed spelljammer ship with an Illithid captain. Fuck, what level was that? That was deeper down. I actually want to look at that one. There's so much here. It's crazy. Not the graveyard. Obstacle course is good too. Sea deeps, no. Crap, where was that? There it is. Level 19. And the Illithid captain looks like the Davy Jones character from Pirates of the Caribbean, like straight up. They just ripped that off. Right there. There it is. You can see there's the ship, right in the middle of these caverns. And then down here, I believe, is the lower end of the ship. And this one is literally one side of it is a water genie, and the other side of it is an earth genie, and they're just at war with each other. And there's this giant river of ooze in the middle, with a bunch of people being transformed into oozes. Freaking awesome. There's a stone giant lair with a miniaturized castle. So there's at least two places that's literally a dungeon within a dungeon, because you're already in a big dungeon, and then there are 2 places where you literally enter an additional dungeon. One of them is in the higher up section. This one, level 7, Mad Goth's Castle, which is apparently, and there are notes in here, based on a module from 1996. Short-lived dungeon crawl series of adventures designed for the 2nd edition of the D&D. Where is that one? Level, what did I say, 6? No, 7. This is the Dwerger one, I believe, at the Umber Hulks. Level 7. And Roll20 is doing really well for me right now. Okay, so this is a bunch of stone giants, which is cool, because I think stone giants are neat and weird looking. Again, you can see the art here, which is pretty cool. The one stone giant, they look like aliens, that big head. Literally has like a giant flute that she can use to summon the giant bats in this area. But there is a miniaturized floating castle in the middle of it, and it has a sphere around it that if anybody enters this castle, they get shrunken down to 1/12 of their size, with the exception of 2 creatures. There's a homunculus and a fairy dragon, and both of those creatures like warring for this castle. So again, that's the multiple factions thing. And obviously players will shrink if they get anywhere near it. And oh, and by the way, the stone giants here have short-term the thing from Memento, where you can't remember anything that happened. I believe literally like 8 hours or something. Like every day, the stone giants wake up, and it's just they don't remember anything. So that's also a thing the players have to do. So the players like want to ally themselves to the stone giants. Well, too fucking bad, because you might do that and then come back, and the stone giants will be hostile to you, which is hilarious. But the castle you can see here on the map, and then down here is the actual castle part. So it's literally a fucking dungeon within a dungeon, which is an amazing thing. And it's a really cool use of the fairy dragon. The fairy dragon named Otto is a huge dick, and just jacks with these poor stone giants who can't remember anything. He just goes invisible and does all this terrible things to the stone giants, and they're just being tormented. So there's just a lot going on here. The other one is even crazier, which is, I think it's level 16. Yeah, yeah, level 16 is a gateway to the asteroid that orbits Toril, the planet of the Forgotten Realms. You can see here's an excellent picture of it, and it literally has a gateway to this apparently hollowed out asteroid, and it's all Githyanki and Githzerai and red dragons. Really good use of the Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes here. You can see here there's just a bunch of crazy like cracked openings, and then there's literally a gateway to the asteroid, which is here. And you can see around the asteroid, it's got its own gravitational pull. Literally, it's just open to space down here at level 20. There's dragons flying around. Like, if you were thinking like you were just going through tunnels and tunnels of dungeon, that is not the case. Like, every dungeon is a very unique biome and just has really crazy cool shit going on, to where you are in an asteroid or in a miniaturized castle. There's underground rivers, underground forests, underground lakes, underground swamps. There's a Lich's lair. I think there's like multiple Lich layers. There's a Death Knight's lair. There's a cool like haunted manor that's really low down, like level 22. That's like close to the Far Realm, and you walk in and it's just like fucked up stuff happening. It's like everything's like warped, and all the it's a noble family that's actually one of the better stories here. It's like one of the noble families that has fallen from grace, and they're all kind of like monstrous and Lovecraftian and all that craziness. Like, it's so good. It's so good. What was level? Oh, I'm trying to remember. There was, maybe the asteroid was the one. Okay, the obstacle course. This one had one of my favorite things about it. Level 15 is literally just a death trap dungeon ruled by a death tyrant. So it's very much like a Tomb of Horrors style thing, and it literally is designed. It's like bare bones, and it's just a gauntlet. It's called the obstacle course. And it features Halaster's play-by-play. So during the course of the PC's adventures in this dungeon, Halaster's disembodied voice will provide play-by-play commentary, which is fucking hysterical. The commentary tends to be sarcastic, biting, and demoralizing. A few examples of what the disembodied voice might say are provided below. When a character misses with a melee attack roll, swing and a miss. When a character takes damage, ouch, that'll leave a mark. When the party cleric drops to 0 hit points, the cleric is down, stick a fork in it, this party's done. I would have so much fun with that. That is absolutely amazing and so flavorful and thematic and fun and a neat idea. There's a giant chasm that runs cut through this entire dungeon. Like, it's just, it's so good. I'm so giddy. Like, I really, if you like dungeons, holy crap, this campaign has just everything. Now, yes, would I have preferred like well-detailed, well-drawn, professionally made artsy maps? Yes. Am I going to knock this campaign for having these kind of basic maps? Yeah, but I recognize the fact that due to the size and scale of these maps, it actually might work in everyone's favor that these are more done in this style, where it's more detail-less. But it's still better, and I actually am glad that I saw the maps in Dragon Heist now, because these are better than Dragon Heist maps. I think I might have been more shocked at the maps, to the extent that they're like, oh man, these don't look nearly as good, and they don't, as, Prince of the Apocalypse or Tomb of Annihilation, or, all of those maps. But they're so big, and there's so much going on, that I feel like that's a good compromise. And they are like, there's enough here that it still looks good, and you could always add in your own material. So I think that's part's fine. Story-wise, you're really not going to get an overarching story. They don't have that good connection between this and Dragon Heist, which to me is an advantage because I didn't like Dragon Heist. Really, just any excuse to go to Waterdeep and head down that giant hole in the yawning portal, go for it. That's all you need. Halaster's goals can be, let's see, I think they're mentioned at the beginning. Clean house. You want adventurers to clean out parts of the dungeon, or you want the adventurers to destroy that lich that he's at war with, or Halaster wants to become the Waterdeep Shadow Lord, or he wants to find an apprentice who could recruit one of the PCs. So there's different goals that you can determine for Halaster in terms of your overarching villain, but the storytelling is really going to be up to you as the DM to, in terms of incorporating your player stories. And I do think there is enough story within each level, and I like the way that's done. It's just instead it's like mini adventures and mini stories throughout each dungeon. It also has the advantage of you pulling any of these single dungeons into other campaigns. For example, there's a lot of Underdark shit in here. There's a lot of Drows, a lot of Dwergar. There's every Underdark creature you can imagine, and there are even times where you could easily have a tunnel just go to the Underdark, and so you could combine this with Out of the Abyss, for example, and have that be part of the campaign storyline. So that works really well. This one works really well interlocking with other campaigns, particularly Out of the Abyss because of the obvious underground connections there. Um, but if you're big into like political machinations and storytelling in terms of that, like the stuff that goes on in like Storm King's Thunder and I guess Dragon Heist, like you're not gonna find really any of that here. So you need to know what you're getting, and you are getting a dungeon, a big ass dungeon. I do want to. I did mention I was gonna look at um, the decks. So if you go, there are secrets the players can learn. So you could literally, and you can technically just deal one out. So you deal it out, deal, so you find two secrets, and you click on this, and you can see, okay, here's the secret that you got, and that's just kind of a neat thing. You can use the cards as a way of kind of a good faith because the players know that you're also randomly doing it. If you don't want to leave that up to randomization, a lot of DMs don't. I'm torn about this. Some things I like, some things I don't like. I don't like leaving a lot of the Strahd tarot stuff up to randomization. The cards are cool, and they did that card concept with the Roll20 Curse of Strahd module. But a lot of it, I don't want to leave that up to chance about like the really important factors of that campaign. But other things you could, and the secrets are just they gain one like good piece of information about each level. So that can be a fun thing to just randomly deal out. And the other thing is you can add a rune deck, which again these runes are just either bad kind of traps that happen, or they can be beneficial, and it's just up to you as the DM to determine which one that you want. I kind of wish these were printed on two separate cards because your player, if you give them the Bane effect, your player's like, well, why didn't you give me the boon? That's so much better. I'm like, well, yeah, it is. That's just something that triggers basically anytime the players try to use any of the teleports or shortcuts that are in the dungeon. But this, it's just a neat a feature that Roll20 does is these playing cards, because that's in the actual book you have those as handouts, which you do have those as handouts here as well. You can totally just, if you don't want to use it, the deck of cards, you can just, hey, I'm just going to show you this handout, and there it is. That's all you need. So, man, Dungeon of the Mad Mage really exceeds all of my expectations with just a very, very few caveats. But if you and your group are at all interested in dungeon crawls, I don't think you're going to find a more extensive, more lovingly crafted, and really more intriguing set of dungeons. Let's go over my final pros and cons for Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Let's shut that down. And let's head over to this one. Let's zoom back in. There we go. I've been having to pop around all the maps, zooming in and out. Roll20 has been a champ, actually. It's been quite quickly, so no complaints there. Pros: an astonishingly gigantic 23 level mega dungeon that takes a party from level 5 to level 20, which I believe no other official 5th edition campaign has gone that high. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know YouTube loves to offer corrections in the comments, and I love them. I'm definitely wrong at times, and that's the best people can admit when they're wrong. I think the closest one is Out of the Abyss, which gets you to like maybe 15 or 16 at the end, and you're literally like fighting like Demogorgon and shit. But this one, literally like the beginning of the last dungeon, is made for level 17. And an interesting thing that it does is, because the dungeon is literally operated by like this sentient entity called Jaharia or something like that, it literally just mentions the fact that the dungeon master can gate those dungeons. So it literally says like, you're not high enough level to go this far, which is a very kind of bullshit video game thing to do, but it is important to tell players. That was something I ran into a problem with when reran Prince of the Apocalypse. Because those dungeons are so interconnected but varying levels, it was very easy for the players to go from level 6 to like step into like a level 9 dungeon, and it was like way above their pay grade. Here, that's less of a problem because obviously it's a little more linear, but there are opportunities where you can do shortcuts and do things like that, and it's an easy way to gate the players. But just you get so many maps here, and they're so huge. That's my another pro. Each dungeon level is gigantic. If you look on here, Level 1 is 73 by 98 squares. Level 3 is 88 by 119 squares. That's literally insane. Like that's from 4,000 to like 9,000 5-foot squares. It's ridiculous how huge. I mean, 23 levels is already huge, and each level is in itself huge. Like it's crazy. Pro, each level tells a story with multiple factions, enemies, and potential allies. Some levels are a little more interesting than others. Obviously, I glossed over the ones that I didn't think were quite as interesting, and that I can't just, cover everything here in general, but they really do a good job of every level has something interesting going on with multiple factions fighting each other, or interesting monsters, or just cool shit. There's a whole Illithid cavern. There's, a Drow fortress you can assault. There's Githyanki, operating around that asteroid. There's just so many factions and creatures and monsters that you'll encompass. In a lot of ways, this one feels like a spiritual successor of Princes of the Apocalypse, because I think that was the other adventure that really did a good job of incorporating a lot of different creatures and like environmental storytelling within dungeons too. Pro, there's a nice variety of biomes and settings, as I just mentioned, from drow caves to underground forests and swamps to a miniaturized castle, an evil wizard school, and an orbiting asteroid, just to name a few things. Crazy. Pro, over 250 creatures to instantly drop into your dungeon. I've never seen a Roll20 module with nearly that many creatures. They're usually closer to about 100 or 150. This one has over 250 creatures. That is everything you could possibly want. Pro, there are lots of opportunities and spaces to expand any level of the dungeon for custom content and dynamic lighting and map design. Keep it entirely optional. So as I mentioned, those are those tunnels that go off the map. I just think that's a really, really good, clever design, because, even the best published adventure, you're going to want to do stuff to it. You're going to want to make it your own, and that's a cool way of doing it, is by adding your own paths, or by, connecting other campaigns or your own dungeons, or dungeons you get on the DM's Guild or whatever else. And the way they're designed in, Roll20 and on the maps is you can easily just, open that path up, and there's your tunnel going to a whole nother dungeon. Final Pro, that bonus map pack that lets you drop any of Dungeon of the Mad Mages dungeons into your own Roll20 campaign, is a great solution for those that have their own campaigns running. They're like, well, we'll run this one eventually. Or maybe you just want to take, and I'm saying hypothetically, or maybe you want to just take one of these dungeons you really like you like that asteroid dungeon concept, or the miniature castle, or just one of the random caves. And it's like, I want to drop this into my campaign. My Out of the Abyss campaign could use this, obstacle course with a Death Tyrant in it or something. And you can do that. So that's really great. I don't know if that's worth the full price, of the whole thing, is getting that bundle included. Actually, not sure if that's purchasable separately. I should have looked into that, but it's a really good perk to have. It's really nice. Cons, the maps. I still have to put it as a con, and I know I wrestled with myself a lot for this, because I do really feel like they are a good compromise. But if I had my druthers, I would have each one of these be just an amazingly detailed, beautiful, like Mike Shelley style map. Jason Thompson, or one of those, anybody that makes good, just really cool dungeon maps. That's me. That's what I would prefer. It's barely a con here. It is kind of a con, but it's not a big one, honestly. And maps are a big thing for me. If you've seen any of my DM's Guild reviews or something, that's a big point of contention or praise for me, is how good your maps are, because I do play on Roll20, and that's a factor. This one, honestly, I would add to these. I would add details, but I don't think I would actually change that much. I actually like the way a lot of them look, with maybe that one exception of level 5. So it's a con, but it's not like nearly as big of a con as it was with Dragon Heist. Con, there's less an overarching story and more a series of mini quests and adventures. Now, I do like the mini quests and adventures, and I like the self-contained stories, but I was just very surprised by how little overall story there was, like overall plot, and with how little to no connection there was to Dragon Heist. I just assumed, it would be like a sequel. And the only way it's a sequel is that you end level 5 on the 1, and then you start this one at level 5. So yes, they do transition, and obviously this one takes place in Waterdeep, sort of, but also there's almost, the only information is like, well, you can go in the Yawning Portal and talk to people there, and there's Volo, and there's Darnum, whatever his name is, and then you just hop down the thing, and then you're in the Undermountain, and then it basically has nothing to do with anything you did in Dragon Heist from there on in. And you again, a good DM can make those connections and make those things matter. Just based on what I read, the Xanathar villain path would have the most relevancy, but really anything would do, and you can create those connections to Waterdeep, and maybe that can be your plot that you take for going into this one. Is like, okay, well, now that you care about Waterdeep after Dragon Heist, then here's a problem that Waterdeep has in terms of Undermountain, and you need to clear it out, and Halaster was a problem, and can you guys deal with this? So that can be one thing, but I was a bit surprised by how little story there was. And that was the other con, is just has very little to do with its predecessor of Dragon Heist. That was just kind of surprising to me. Final verdict for Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Featuring an awe-inspiring mega dungeon with over 20 levels of varied biomes and hundreds of creatures, Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage is the dungeon crawl adventure of your dreams. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can tune into our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.